Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Photographing 7 Presidencies with Doug Mills, co-hosted by the Institute of Politics, the Gate, the Maroon, and the Parisia Program for Public Discourse. My name is Margot Furman, and I'm a first-year student majoring in political science and Russian studies here in the college. I am also a writer and editor for The Gate, the IOP's political review. As someone with a strong interest in photography and visual storytelling, I can't think of a better person to speak about the impact of a single image than today's guest. It is my honor to introduce today's speaker, Doug Mills. Mr. Mills is a 3-time Pulitzer Prize winning photographer and White House correspondent for the New York Times. Over the course of his career, Mr. Mills has photographed every president from Donald Trump to Ronald Reagan and captured some of the most defining moments in modern American political history. Most recently, his photograph capturing a bullet streaking past President Trump's head during the 2024 rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, earned him his 3rd Pulitzer Prize and quickly became one of the most recognizable political images of this decade. Before working at the Times, Mr. Mills served for 15 years as the chief photographer for the Associated Press in Washington, D.C. Moderating today's conversation is Jennifer Steinhauer, Senior Director at the Institute of Politics and former New York Times reporter. Before we start, a few quick housekeeping notes. Please silence your phones. During Q&A, microphones will circulate around the room, and students will be given priority for questions. While this program is live streamed on YouTube, no other taping of any aspects of this event will be permitted. Be sure to join us for upcoming speaker series events, including the College Educated Working Class, a book talk with New York Times labor reporter Noam Scheiber next Tuesday at 5:30 p.m. at the IOP, and a momentous midterm unpacked with Axe and Friends on Thursday, May 14th at the Quadrangle Club at 5:30 p.m. Students can also fill out our end-of-year survey and get a chance to win an $100 Visa gift card. See the monitors outside or at the check-in stand for the QR code. For more upcoming opportunities, please visit politics.uchicago.edu. Now, please join me in welcoming Doug Mills and Jennifer Steinhauer to the stage.
Hi, Doug.
How are you, Jennifer?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. This is so exciting. Doug and I did overlap for many years at the New York Times. I wasn't fancy enough to work at the White House. So the one time I worked with Doug, I don't know why you were free of White House duty. The president must have been traveling. But we went out together to do a story on people who were stealing, a guy who was stealing flowers in Northwest Washington from everyone's front yard. So I feel like that was like kind of a low assignment for you, but it was the thrill of my life to cover the Northwest Washington flower thief. So this is more up your speed, iconic images. The students in the room were not even born when this was taken, and yet they all recognize it because this is really part of the canon of United States history, so many photos that you've taken. I want to talk today. I think the easiest way to have this conversation, since we're focusing on presidents, which is certainly not the only thing you've done with your career, but obviously it's what you're best known for. I think we'll just kind of talk about it chronologically. Sure. But before we get to this image, this is where we're going to start. Could you just give us a little sense of how you ended up photographing so many presidents? How did you get on the White House beat?
First of all, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. Jennifer, I was a young, hungry photographer who had 3 or 4 jobs going at one time. I was in school and had someone come into the class and speak to Larry Rubenstein, a photographer from UPI, who I showed him my portfolio. He tore it apart, said, you need to work on this, this, and this. And he was very much someone who thought I had talent and kind of took me under his wing. So I started freelancing for UPI, started freelancing for a newspaper at the same time. I was going to school full time, and I also was having a cooperative education job with the National Bureau of Standards. So I had a lot of, ducks in the pond, so to speak, and trying to do my best. Had no social life at all. I was working 4 jobs and going to school. And then I got a break to get an interview at the small local newspaper and got a job there. And then Larry Rubenstein watched my work from UPI, where he was the chief photographer. And then they had an opening when I was 23, and I applied for the job. And I remember everybody in the office, I was probably the youngest by at least 35 years, and at least. And they said, congratulations, you've got this great job. The good news is you're in the Washington Bureau. The bad news is you're going to be on nights for the next 3 years. Yeah. So I had a 3 to 11 shift, and I think the second day, maybe the third day, I was asked, hey, can you go over and cover something in the White House? It's like, the White House? I was like, sure, yeah, where is it? They're like, it's like 3 blocks from here. You've never been there? And I was like, no, I never as a child went there on a tour or anything like that. Did not know a lot about politics. I love sports, so that was like how I felt like that's what got me into UPI, because I was shooting a lot of sports. And I went over and started photographing Ronald Reagan and just fell in love with the job. And it's an addicting job. It's an adrenaline, junkie job. It's not a 9-to-5 job. Thankfully, I have a wonderful, wonderful spouse. My wife has been very supportive for all of my travel, which can be as much as 250 days a year during a campaign. So that's where I got my start, just covering UPI and covering the night shift. And
starting with President Reagan. And I think it's important, too, to remember how different it was. There wasn't all the fencing around the White House. I mean, there were people who would be crossing Pennsylvania Avenue. They would cross right through the White House, just regular pedestrians to get, to cross that area as quickly as they could. It was perfectly normal to do that. There were not people with machine guns outside. There was not. It's really physically changed. The security has changed. Would you say, too, if you look back at this image, would you say that it has changed incredibly in terms of access to the president and the ability to photograph?
Yes. I mean, after the attempt on his life took place, things started to tighten up around the White House. The fencing went up a little tighter. The Pennsylvania Avenue used to be open. I don't know if anybody's been to Washington, D.C. lately, and you walk along Pennsylvania Avenue. Now it's completely closed. It used to be open with buses. The bus stop was right in front of the Northwest Gate, where the White House press corps goes in. So it's changed a lot, and some for good, some for bad. I mean, the president now, especially given President Trump's assassination attempts, things are extremely tight, and his ability to go out and do the normal speeches outdoors, the normal walkabouts, or do anything outdoors is really prohibited now because of the attempts. And if he does do a speech outdoors, now it's typically behind glass, and it's changed a lot. But access to the president, that all depends on the administration. The Reagan administration was great for access. He had a very set schedule. I mean, you could set your watch to. He was never late for anything, just like Bush 41 and Bush 43. They were never late. You could set your watch to their schedule. So. It's in this picture here. This was from the Challenger explosion. There was the explosion happened, and a few days later, President Reagan went down to the funeral for a lot of the astronauts. Sorry?
This is 1986, I think.
Yes,
right?
yes. And I was working for UPI at the time, and again, I was on the night shift, and the day shift photographer covered the White House, and this was like I felt like this was like my first big assignment that they trusted me with, and. Luckily, I came away with the best picture that day, and it haunts me even sometimes just to look at that picture, because I remember how sad everybody was, a lot of crying, a lot of tears. She's basically looking up into the sky when they read her husband's name, who was killed in the Challenger explosion.
And I mean, of course, this one sticks in your mind. This was early in your career of covering the White House, but you've been with presidents for so many emotional moments. You've been to so many funerals. You've been to so many military funerals. We're going to get to some specific images that we have over the years. But how can you describe sort of, you have a technical challenge, right? As like a reporter standing there in a moment like this, the job is to write it down, maybe to tape. You have to do something that's technical and professional, and you're also in the moment with people who are in deep grief, and you're closer to them than a reporter would be in that setting.
That is true.
How do you grapple with that? Has that changed over the years?
No, it's one of those things where many times when you see photographs from a news photographer who are at a funeral in Washington or at Dover Air Force Base in Delaware, when a fallen soldier comes back to the United States, that's where they take them. We're not allowed there without the family's permission. Every soldier's family comes back and checks, they have a full sheet of things that they do and don't want. And one of them is, do you want the media here? And whenever you see a dignified transfer and the media is there, that's because the families wanted us there. But it's very difficult to go to some of those funerals and feel the pain and hear the tears. And it can take, it takes a toll on you afterwards. I mean, you think about it a lot because you're photographing somebody at their toughest time of their life, and it ends up in the newspaper or it ends up online somewhere. So it's a delicate task, but it's something that is part of my job, and I have to, shed a tear, which I have at many. There was another funeral that I went to during the Gulf War where somebody had passed away, and it was a soldier, and the family, we were so close. We were literally, it was unusually close to them, but we could hear every sniffle, and I was just crying during the whole time while I was taking pictures. And it's just one of those things that does affect you that way, but you have your job to do.
And I suppose have families come to you later and ask for prints or?
Oh, yes. I mean, there's usually it takes about a month or two where somebody will say, hey, I really appreciate you being there. Would you mind sending me a print? And I'm always the first one to, yep, I'll send you a print for sure.
A little lighter moment. I assume this is an Air Force One.
Yes.
And this is something also that I feel like has evolved over the years. The relationship of reporters and photographers on Air Force One, the ability and willingness of a president. Can you reflect a little bit about how all the presidents you've covered? I'm sure you don't remember this exact moment. Maybe you do. But
I do.
What's going on here? Do you remember why he was dressed this way? And how do you have sort of? Are all presidents lighter on Air Force One? Are all of them basically as accessible? What's been the story?
Yeah, this was a moment that the president had been up to New York for a white tie dinner, and he was obviously feeling pretty good. Came back on the plane to talk to us, and when the president comes back on the plane, let me just give you just a little bit of how it works on Air Force One. Every time the president flies somewhere, there are 13 members of the White House travel pool or press corps that travel with him, and that's called the travel pool. And in that 13, number, there are 4 or 5 still photographers. And thankfully, the New York Times has a seat on Air Force One every trip. That is not something that we take for granted, and it's not something that's free. Every journalist who flies on Air Force One pays for not the journalist, but their company pays for the flight. And it's first class plus $1 for every flight. And in an average year, there may be some pictures of Obama in Africa on the slideshow, but a typical trip like that would be anywhere from $60,000 to $70,000 per journalist to go. And again, on an average year, campaign year, it can go anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million just to have a New York Times photographer traveling with the president. And each organization has to pay that. The reporters rotate. So for us to be able to get on the plane takes, the White House background check, security, Secret Service, FBI. We have a hard pass that is assigned to us. But as far as the access on the plane, the president comes back. We cannot go up in the front of the cabin and go to his cabin and say hello. Hey, how you doing, sir? But when they do come back, sometimes we get no warning at all. We can have just been served a meal, and all of a sudden the president comes back. So it's like this chaotic, scene of dishes flying everywhere. I'm not kidding, especially if it's on a big story. And some presidents use it to their advantage, and some just come back and talk to the press and just answer questions. They're probably President Trump is by far the most active president as far as coming back into the White House press cabin. And it is usually every trip. If he doesn't come back, the reporter's like, all right, what the hell's going on? Why isn't he here? Why isn't he coming back? But he does come back a lot. Obama used to come back a lot. Clinton came back a lot. Clinton would come back and stay for an hour and a half. Like the reporters would just go off and start eating, and then he's standing around talking about football or something else. But he would come back a lot too. And Obama loved it just to go back and forth. He enjoyed the engagement with the reporters just to find out what they're talking about and what they're thinking. Sometimes it's on camera. Most of the times it's on camera. There have been certain administrations that would say, we're going to let the president come back and it's off the record, so you can't take pictures and you can't roll video. But that means the reporters can have access to the president and talk to him about anything, but it's all off the record. And typically what happens is the president will say, the press secretary will come back and say, okay, this is all off the record. How many times have we heard that in D.C.? It's all off the record. And then he'll say something and the reporters will go, wait, can we get that on the record, sir? Yeah, sure, okay, yeah, you can have that on the record, but nothing else, or just little bits and pieces. And so it all varies with administration about how often they come back. When there's during 9/11 when you were showing the picture of Andy Card whispering in his ear, in President Bush's ear, we didn't find out what Andy Card had actually spoken to President Bush about when he whispered in his ear that tragic day, until we were on Air Force One.
We're going to get to those photos, actually.
We're
going to narrate those.
So anyway, he came back and I asked him what he told, President Bush, and he told us that he said, Mr. President, a second aircraft has just hit the World Trade Center. America's under attack. And it was just, I said it yesterday, I say it today, it still gives me chills to think about that. So each president is different as far as access coming back on the plane. And again, some would say, president's coming back, but no photos. So that's hard because you're on the plane, you're paying for the flight, he's coming back to talk to the reporters, they end up making news, we don't have a picture of the president. So it's one of these balances that we negotiate with the White House and say, listen, if he does put something on the on the record, then we have to be able to take a photo of it.
Well, it's amazing that President Trump feels safe back there with the whole enemy of the people so often. But
Yes.
Do you have any idea what's going on here?
Yes, we were in the Oval
crazy.
Office with Bush, Bush 41, amazing man, and we were about to, have a photo op. Somebody was coming in to meet him, and all of a sudden they said, Mr. President, can you get a call? And the Oval Office desk is behind the media, so he realized he couldn't walk on the other side of us or through us. So he was just like, I'll pick it up here. Can I get it here? So he was trying to do that. And it was, and he was so organic as far as like his movements. Nothing about this guy I felt like was ever staged. He was just he was former ambassador to China, CIA director, vice president, and then when he became president, he was a lot of fun to cover. And on a personal note, he one day in the lower press office, like on a Friday afternoon, everybody's ready to go home for the weekend, and I'm sitting in the press room, and the door slides open, and typically it's another reporter coming through, or maybe one of the staff, and it's President Bush. He sticks his head in through the door, and I'm like, oh my gosh! And I thought to reach for my camera to take a picture of him, and he said, no, Doug, we're good. Do you play horseshoes? I said, yeah, it's been a while, sir. And he said, well, find another photographer. I want to go throw some shoes, and I want you guys to come with us. So I went back to where all the photographers were sitting in the back of the press room, and I was like, hey, guys, does anybody know how to play horseshoes? And they're like, horseshoes? No, nobody. And then one other photographer, Bernie Boston from the LA Times, said, well, yeah, it's been a while, but I said, all right, come on, Bernie, let's go. And he goes, where are we going? I said, the president just asked me if anybody else knew how to play. And they were like, I want to play now. I want to play. Like the whole room, everybody wanted to get on it. And he would frequently do that. So then Bernie and I became a team, and we played against the president, the vice president, his family, and it was right out. He had a horseshoe pit put in right outside the Oval Office. And he would, I stayed there till 9 o'clock that night. The next day, he said, we're coming back tomorrow. Tell your wife to come down. We're going to throw hot dogs and hamburgers on the grill. And, that may seem like, an unusual event, but with him, it was, just typical. I mean, it wasn't like he was trying to get favors from me. Pictures don't lie. It's not like he was trying to influence me in any way, but he was just, he was like your grandpa. He just, wanted to have you around, and I really enjoyed his company. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to cover.
I feel like that's also a story just about how Washington's changed too. It just sort of feels like that. Just like it's hard to imagine that now. That's not a statement about Trump. That's a statement about Washington to me.
Yes.
It's like a different place. So this photo, I am curious, and obviously Hillary Clinton was never president, but you shot her as a candidate, Secretary of State. Can you kind of like reflect on what it was like there as the First Lady? And how that sort of evolved as you shot her in her very different iterations? Yes.
That photo there was taken on inauguration night in Arkansas when he was elected, election night, excuse me. And I had not covered him a lot. And because I was on the Bush campaign, because I was covering the White House, and he was running against, Bill Clinton. And so I didn't have a lot of contacts within the administration or within the staff. And that sometimes is an uphill battle because our job is all about access. The more access you can get to the president, the better you can do your job. With access comes relationships and trust. And I think that's something that I've tried to thrive to do with each and every administration. Get to know the staff on a personal level. Get to know the president somewhat on a personal level. Learn their mannerisms. And then ultimately ask for access, because without it, you can't really show the true job that they're doing or show them in any sort of, organic moment. And that's something that, I really try and do. This was a picture that, crazy at the time, he is president-elect, and every morning he would leave the governor's mansion and go run through town with either aides, or sometimes Al Gore came down to run with him. But he would run through town and go to the McDonald's. And then he loved McDonald's, just like Donald Trump, and he loved going in there. And then he would talk with everybody. It was like his happy place. It was like his coffee shop. He knew everybody in there. And then he would walk back to he would cool down by walking back to the governor's mansion. And he was climbing back over the fence because he didn't want him to open up the full fence. So it was just like this mad scramble of photographers trying to get a picture. And we followed him every day, doing that. And so the access to him was very good until the Lewinsky scandal, and then everything kind of clamped down. So, and this was, this picture here was during the peace talks in Washington.
Obviously, something like this, bazillion photographers, you see variations on this image all the time. But how do you go about being in a scrum of gajillion photographers in these kind of very historic moments? What are you seeking to do to make your shot special, or how to differentiate yourself and to have something so resonant as so many decades later?
I think when I started out as a sports photographer, one of the main things that you're taught is peak action. You've got to find peak action photos in sports. And I've kind of parlayed that into politics. There's always one moment in every event that we cover, I feel like, is the peak moment. And I strive to be patient and wait for those moments and not push them. And yes, there are a scrum of photographers, probably 100 photographers in that room that day, or journalists, 100 journalists, lots of TVs, lots of stills. So it's a very competitive job. And doing your homework is probably the most important thing, is studying where, getting any kind of intel about who's going to be in the room, what the light's going to be, what angles are going to be available to walk to. So those things really, force you to think. And the more you can think about what you're going to do that day, the better. And this picture here is.
Is this during the Lewinsky scandal when they went off on vacation?
Yes, they went to Hawaii.
And this was Hawaii with Hillary Clinton and Chelsea.
Right, that's Chelsea on the left, and her girlfriend on the. She had a buddy traveling with her, and they were in Hawaii. And I was on the trip, and a lot of times on those trips, you never see the president. We'll be told he's at the hotel, and they'll keep us outside. And this day, they brought the press pool over, and they said, hey, the president may make a statement afterwards. There was some serious flooding going on in Iowa at the time. And so there was speculation, and the staff thought, well, maybe he's going to come speak afterwards. So I got out of the van, had my cameras with me, and I walked down the steps, and I said, I'm going to go down and use the restroom. So I went down, and then I was downstairs in this beautiful hotel on the beach, and I walk out, and I was like, wow, what are those agents doing out by the water? You could see the secret. I mean, these guys are in their full dress, they're not in bathing suits, and they're on the beach with the earpieces, and I was like, I wonder if POTUS, or maybe, the First Lady's out there, but I wondered if, POTUS was out there. President, that stands for President of the United States. So I walked down the steps and kept looking and looking. I was like, yeah. And then I ran into an agent that I knew, a Secret Service agent, and said, hey, what's going on down there? He said, yeah, POTUS is out in the water. I was like, oh my God. So I had my cameras, and I said, well, what are my restrictions here, sir? And he said, well, right now you're on private property, but you were invited here. You weren't invited over there where you could take this picture. But over there, next to the water, there's 12 feet between where the breakwater ends and where the ocean, or where the sand starts. You can go right in there if you'd like, and I can't do anything about it. I was like, oh. So I went down there, and lo and behold, he never saw me until he started walking out of the water, because they were out, playing and not paying attention. There were a lot of people, milling around on the beach watching, not with cameras.
Was he annoyed?
What's that?
Was he annoyed when you realized you got the shot?
Yeah.
Did he yell at you?
No, but the staff did.
Oh, okay. Well, staff, whatever, right?
But the crazy thing about it is I was working for the Associated Press at the time, and that picture was on the front page of so many newspapers the next day. And again, there was flooding going on in Iowa. So he got a lot of heat about being, playing in the water in Hawaii while everybody else is underwater in Iowa. So where do you think we stopped on the way home from Hawaii? We stopped in Des Moines so he could fill sandbags. It was just like the yin and the yang. He had to do it. Politically, he had to, go recoup and it's hard. I mean, the president goes on vacation. They're allowed to go on vacation.
Until you ruined it. Thanks, Doug.
Yeah.
Well, but that's also like so many elements, right? It's situational awareness, understanding, there's Secret Service, taking advantage of the moment, being polite, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Interfacing with Secret Service in a polite manner instead of just trying to race down to the beach, and
it
wouldn't have worked out. You wouldn't have gotten your photographs. There's so many, I think, like important professional lessons in there. So let's talk about 9/11, because obviously that was an astounding day for all of us in journalism, but I think that was a particularly photographed day, right? And especially because so few people had access to the president that day. So here's obviously is the famous famous photo where Andy Card, president's chief of staff, the president was in Florida, I believe, reading to a bunch of school students. It was a campaign stop, or it was
the start of No Child Left Behind.
No Child Left Behind. So he's rolling out his policy.
Exactly.
This event was wrapping. Andy Card was waiting, right? Did he interrupt the event?
He interrupted the event, which was really strange. We were in the classroom, and as we arrived at the school that morning, and again, this No Child Left Behind had been talked about for months, and they were finally launching this program, and the First Lady was speaking on Capitol Hill at the same time. He was in the classroom, so it was like a real full press about it. But as we arrived at the school, we were in press vans, 2 press vans. We ride in the motorcade behind the president, and Gordon Jandro, who was the press wrangler at the time, took a call on a bag phone, and it was not like we had a lot of cell phones then, and he was on the phone talking, and they were like, a plane crash where? It was in New York City. So he was repeating everything he was hearing, and he said, how big's the plane? They said, oh, it's a very small plane. That's all they knew at that point. So all we knew going into the school was there had been a plane crash, and maybe that's going to, deflect some of the news about the No Child Left Behind. It may, be bigger or smaller. Yeah, it was just going to be something else going on. So once we got in the classroom, everything was normal. We didn't know what was happening, and then all of a sudden, Andy Card walked in the door, a side door, which was very unusual for the chief of staff to come in. And Andy is somebody who I had known by covering Bush 41. And been, and again, being there and learning and meeting and talking to people and, getting their trust. Andy Card walked through the door and we locked eyes, and I was like, Andy, what's going on? And all he did, he just gave me like this little tooth sign. I was like, peace sign? What? I couldn't figure out what he was saying. So I thought, this is really unusual. Then he just walked right over, because he was waiting for a right moment while the president was reading books to the children, and whispered in his ear, Mr. President's second aircraft is just at the World Trade Center. America's under attack, as I said before. But it was just, one of those moments. Crazy day, and I was one of, again, the 13 traveling pool that day. And
this is Air Force One, I assume?
This is on Air Force One, and this is the first time the press corps had ever seen live television on the plane. And the only live cable channel at the time was CNN, and they were showing a lot of the destruction, and we were all blown away by what was happening on the ground, but yet we didn't know it. We're flying around. We left Florida, flying around in the plane, and we didn't know where we were going. And in fact, our secrets, we're assigned a press agent every trip from somebody from the Secret Service, and he came back, and I asked him, I said, do you have any idea where we're going? And one of the cameramen from CBS had a compass in his hand, and he goes, we just keep going east, man. We were in Florida, and we're just still going east. So we were out over the ocean just doing circles. And he said, well, one thing I can tell you is we're not going back to D.C. The other thing is I was just told that we have enough food to be on here for 3 days.
Wow.
I was like, 3 days? What? And he said, yeah, I just found out, too, that they can refuel Air Force One in midair. I was like, oh, my gosh. So that's when it really hit you that things are that bad on the ground that we may not be landing for a while. And luckily, things cleared up. There was a lot. Everything else happened, Pennsylvania, the Pentagon. So we flew then to Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, where he made an address to the nation. And again, the technology was not available as it is now. That was one of the things that the 9/11 Commission, which I'm sure you covered, really pointed out to the presidency was, listen, if the president ever has something like this again, you have to be able to address the nation from Air Force One. And so now they've equipped Air Force One with the technology to be able to do that. So it was a long day. The pool went from 13 down to 5. You guys may have read about that, but when we were going back to Air Force One in Florida to take off, they told the president, when we were leaving Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, we were leaving, and they said, Mr. President, we're gonna have a smaller footprint. And we got to the airport, and they had already shrunk the pool from 13 to 5. And he got out to the plane and said, I'm not hiding from anybody. We're still going on the big plane. So they ended up taking the 13 of us down to 5, and I was one of the 5 who was able to fly on the big plane with him the rest of the day. And it was like a ghost town in there. There was no staff other than Ari Fleischer, the White House photographer, Andy Card, and a bunch of Secret Service agents, and the Ravens, who are the Air Force police on the other side. So it was a crazy day, very memorable day in my career, and not one that I ever want to see repeated.
We have so many other iconic images and presidents to get through. We haven't even gotten to them being born yet. But I just want to ask a quick question.
We're getting there.
We got to get to the students' birth times. So, but just real quick, what's the thinking behind this image?
Just that all of a sudden George W. Bush was running for president, and I had not covered him before either. And I went on the campaign trail with him, and this seemed to be his sign. Like he just kept doing, it wasn't the W, but it was all about him trying to get out of his dad's shadow. And so he was a lot of fun to cover also. And he and I had a very, cordial relationship as far as banting back and forth. One day in the Oval Office, he's meeting with a foreign leader, and he sees me, amongst this scrum, which is about the size of this middle, aisle here of press. And we were leaving, and he said, "Hey, Millsy, don't forget to bring the silverware back that you took last night from the party." And I was like, because they had a big White House party the night before. And clearly I was not invited, but he's told, bring back the silverware. So of course, I think it was a British prime minister too, and they were, I got outside and they were like, how'd you get caught stealing? How much did you steal? They believed it. So he was great with, he had a great personality. He loved baseball. And, after my recent Pulitzer, of all people, to send me a handwritten note congratulating me on my third Pulitzer was George W. Bush. And it was a full page of stuff. I cried when I read it because I couldn't believe he took the time to write a letter to me to say, your career continues to grow, you're doing such great work, keep doing what you're doing, and, congratulations. So it says a lot. Every president you cover is different.
Well, let's talk about differences. A couple different things that come up as we're getting deeper into the portfolio of presidents. And you kind of alluded to this, that all presidents have different ways of moving in space. Obviously, many presidents are, try to maintain some level of an exercise routine, so
yes.
It's very common to go out running. President Trump, maybe not so much running, but you have other things about him that we'll get to where he is expressing himself physically. So do you have to kind of memorize body language?
Yes.
And do you kind of know when a president is going to make a crazy face like that? Like, how do you, do you have to get a sense of them as physical beings beyond leaders, I guess?
Yes. Once you learn the mannerisms and you get you're inside the bubble, inside their bubble, which the only people who allow you inside the bubble is the staff. And President Obama, I always say that he was the most photogenic president I've ever covered. And Trump is probably the most iconic. But President Obama was amazing to cover. He had an incredible staff who really worked with the media and the photographers. He and I did go to blows a couple times over access issues. But and that's probably a 15-minute story, but they were basically, it was the invent of Twitter and Instagram, and they were kind of circumventing the media and having their White House photographer cover stuff that typically the press would normally go into, the Oval Office for a bill signing or meeting an old veteran or, something, whatever like if it was Veterans Day, there was things we just weren't seeing. And so I brought it up to Jay Carney, the press secretary at the time, and it did not go over well. And he accused, because I basically said this is propaganda, you can't do this. You're getting rid of the White House travel pool or the still photographers, especially who aren't photographing these moments for history. And the president found out about it because it was in the media. We went on television to talk about it, and I felt just really strongly and passionate about the fact that they shouldn't be doing this. And he was so gracious to invite myself and my daughter to a White House Christmas party. And we were standing in the receiving line, and I was talking with the First Lady. And typically these things are, 10, 15 seconds, and you say hello, turn around, get your picture taken, and out the door you go. This one, my daughter's with me, and the president had met her before at the University of Vermont one time. And he said, "Oh, Ellie, your dad's been giving me a lot of trouble lately." And I was like, and I'm talking to the First Lady, and I hear this, and he said, "Yeah, he's been really hard on me lately." And I was like, well, Mr. President, stop. What's going on here? And he said, well, and so Ellie's like, "I didn't know anything about this, sir." And she's in college, and she's, the president's telling her that her dad's being a jerk. And so, the First Lady says, "What are you guys talking about?" And I was like, okay. So then he said, we're going to fix this, Doug. We're going to fix this. So he, in that line where everybody's now looking around at us like, what is going on in the receiving line with Mills? But he made a huge effort to fix it. He did. And probably one of the greatest, nights I've ever spent at the White House was he invited me and my wife to a state dinner, which was an incredible gesture of just knowing that he knew that I felt passionate about this, much like during his career, that when he felt passionate about something, he fought for it. And I felt like that was like the moment where I thought, okay, he understood my fight, and he basically didn't reward me, but he respected it. And I can't say enough about that because he gets it.
Well, you are talking about big changes in terms of presidents and other people trying to control their image through social media, their own projected image. But another huge thing that happened in this interregnum that we've been going through is the move from film to digital.
Yes.
And so can you talk a little bit about, in high stakes environments, like some of the shots that we've seen, does that kind of change the way you hunt for the moment, or, what's that impact been?
Making the transition from film to digital was a big leap, and this was, back in the late 90s, long time ago. And it was one of those things where I was a Canon user at the time, and Kodak, who obviously did a lot of film at the time, came up with a device that you could put on the bottom of a film camera and make it digital. The quality was terrible. I mean, the emails that you send right now have about the same K value, the same quality as what the pictures we were sending back then. But the chief photographer at the AP, where I worked, Bob Doherty, told me, "Kid, this is the future. You better embrace every bit of technology that comes your way." So he really pushed me to do it. I mean, we used to travel with cases and cases of equipment and, chemicals. We would trash so many bathrooms because each event, everywhere the president went, you got to think there's a photographer somewhere in a hotel bathroom developing film and making prints and then sending them out. And once digital came through, that completely changed everything. And now, as a photographer, I can pick up my camera and basically see every image that I'm taking. With film, you couldn't look at exposure. You were guessing, but you had meters and so forth. But now I can look at it. I can frame it differently. I think it's these cameras have added 20 or 50 years to my career. So it's a huge leap. But now I have so much more control, and the technology allows me now to take pictures with the camera and send them to the New York Times within 10 seconds most of the time. So someone is sitting there waiting in the office all the time when the president's speaking or he's at an event. And that technology has changed because everything is about being first and being, obviously with photographers, you don't have to worry about it being accurate because it's real. And that's another discussion about AI we could get into too. But yes, everything is there and we can send pictures immediately. And it's done a lot. I look at this picture.
This picture too, I mean, I'm reflecting now on a picture of Clinton without a fat, and I'm picturing with George Bush with Nelson Mandela. And there's just something different here, right? It's not just the leader that he's with. There's something about the way he comports himself.
Well, this.
I mean, obviously, I think we have the Zelensky picture too here. How is he with the world leaders through your lens?
Through my lens, if you back up just for a second for that picture, it kind of looks like he's pointing towards me. He actually was. He frequently, sometimes it's a little embarrassing, but he will introduce me to world leaders. And he was having dinner with Kim Jong-un, and he saw me and he goes, there's Doug Mills, Pulitzer Prize winning photographer, great photographer, I mean, amazing, the best in the world, but unfortunately he works for the New York Times. That's always his, he loves to stick that to me. So he frequently has introduced me to world leaders. Introduced me to the Queen. I got in trouble for that because I said, "Hello, Your Majesty," and I was like that. I got a grip on the arm, said, "We don't talk to her." I was like, "Okay," but he was introducing me to her. So he's done it, to every world leader that comes through.
I want to zip through these because we're going to get to questions, and I really want to give everyone an opportunity in about 10 minutes to give questions. There'll be microphones waving around the room in 10 minutes, so think about that. Zipping through these a little bit, we had another president in between here. I'm assuming that was one of those moments when Anthony Fauci during COVID did not like what the president was saying. Yes. He looks a little unhappy there. Okay. Let's
Big difference, yeah.
Big difference, moving through COVID, going through to Biden. So obviously, the footnote of President Biden is always circles around his age, his
correct,
things like that. When you took this photograph, did you get a lot of shit from the administration for that, or tell us a little bit about the story there? Yeah,
I mean, this picture here, obviously, President Biden had tripped. If you look and see that sandbag on the left, it was a bright sunny day, sunglasses on, giving a commencement speech, and he turned to move and he tripped over that bag. and went down. He went down pretty hard. And I felt like there were already signs that he was not as, fluid. His gait was changing. But after that, I felt like, his mobility issues were heightened. And they stopped using the big stairs on Air Force One most of the time. Reporters, we've all been criticized for not writing about it enough at the time. My defense of that is I think reporters did write about it a lot. I know I photographed a lot of it. Every time I happened to be there, every time he seemed like he fell going up Air Force One time. But I felt like he was so isolated, and we did not have a lot of access to Joe Biden. And I felt like that was because the reporters didn't see him all the time and couldn't write. They couldn't get those moments that we see with other presidents. And it was just, when he came in during COVID, everything was locked down, everybody was masked, press pool was much smaller. Once COVID restrictions were lifted, we got to see him a lot more. But then I think as his mobility issues started flaring up, we just didn't see him much. We didn't see him much in the White House, or we could go 3 or 4 days without seeing him. Now we go 24 hours without seeing Donald Trump, and everybody's losing their mind that something's wrong with him. So we have been spoiled by the access to Donald Trump.
I think are we in Pennsylvania here?
We
now?
are at Butler right here.
Let's talk about it. So started off as a typical rally, I'm assuming, and I think it's notable that one of the things that has always been notable about President Trump's campaigns is that he goes places that other presidents tend not to go. You go to these really rural areas where the press corps would show up in this town, like, where the hell are we? What is this place? It seemed like that was one of those where we see him talking here at the podium in that place. And so that day started out like any other day, I'm guessing. But if you go through this, as you can see, we can almost do this it's almost like a movie when you go through this. So you're sitting here, first of all, you were just doing a regular shot. How did that all evolve? Talk us through that.
Well, it was an incredibly hot day in Butler, Pennsylvania that day. I think I arrived there at 6 o'clock in the morning for a 6 p.m. rally that night. And we go through a lot of security. We have to have our equipment swept. We go through multiple checkpoints. And once we get into the arena, so to speak, we're locked in. And so we were all locked in and hanging out under a small tent. And it was a huge rally. And he basically started off normally. Again, you're on the campaign trail and you can recite, usually, I know I could, word for word sometimes what their speech was going to be. And this speech started out much like all the other ones. But then he brought up this chart, which he normally, I'm sure you've heard him talk about that, but he would always show these charts about the economy and other things, and those were always at the end. But today, and we were in the buffer zone, 4 photographers in that area. We're typically in there about 10 minutes, and then we go to the backstage. But he started out by gesturing over at this chart that he could see on the screen. And when he gestured over, that's when the shots rang out. And I happened to be taking pictures right down from the podium, probably as close as I am to this podium, and was taking pictures of him gesturing. And that's when the shots rang out. And thankfully, I kept my finger on the shutter and had no idea. These were the images that I thought were going to be the images of the day until we were in an area backstage. We were told to go to OSA, offstage announcement area, and went in there, and one of my editors said, "Hey, listen, we have all the great fist pumping pictures. Do you have anything when he was actually fired at? Did you have anything of him going down?" I was like, "Oh my God, I forgot about those." So I start looking through my camera, and again, I'm sending my pictures through a Sony wireless device that allows me to send them in a couple seconds. And I said, "Yeah, I do have something. Let me send them all in." She said, "Send everything you have." So I just start sending them off very quickly. And then I get a call from our colleague, Maggie Haberman, who was back in DC or in New York, maybe, I think maybe DC. But she's saying, "Hey, Doug, are you there?" And I was like, "Yes, I'm here, Maggie." And she said, what the hell's going on? We heard he was not shot, that he cut his ear on a teleprompter. I was like, Maggie, where the hell are you hearing that from? She goes, well, that's what the White House is telling us right now. That's the word in D.C. And this was, again, moments after he was shot. And I said, well, hold on, Maggie. I'm looking at pictures right now, and I'm looking at the teleprompter on the pictures, and there's nothing shattered. There's nothing broken. There was no glass on the ground that I saw. And the teleprompters, as you can see, are fully intact. And that's the black thing on the left there. It may look like a bulletproof shield, but that's a teleprompter. And so I said, she goes, are you sure? I said, hold on, Maggie. So I started looking through the pictures, and I was like, Maggie, I have him grimacing. He grabs his ear, and immediately you can see the blood in his ear. And she was like, oh my God, he was shot then. I said, yes, Maggie, he was. It may have grazed him. I don't know how bad he's hit because, he went down. So then she gets off the phone. She says, this changes a lot. So then she's on, they're on the live desk screaming about it all, and everybody's working about it. And then I get a text from one of our editors in Chicago who says, Doug, I'm going to text you a picture that you took. I need you to look at it very closely because we have people on the line from the FBI who think this is the bullet that either grazed him or went right behind his head. And I was like, the what? And she said, yeah. So she sent me the picture. I looked at it on my phone, and I was like, oh my gosh, yes, that does look like a bullet. I said, but I'm sending you JPEGs because these shoot JPEG and RAW images. But I said, let me look at the RAW images when I get to my laptop just to confirm. And she said, well, everybody here is convinced this is a bullet. So I said, okay, well, let me double check before we publish it. Because I was just thinking maybe it could be a reflection, it could be a bird, it could be anything. And so then once I got the raw images and sent it in, I realized, yes, in fact, it was a bullet. So, one of those 1 in 5 million chances. I mean, even the next day I was leaving because I drove back to Pittsburgh and was at the airport the next morning to fly to the RNC convention. And I was sitting in my, in the terminal working on the pictures, and this guy walks up to me and goes, oh my God, man, those pictures are all over the internet. How'd you get them? And I was like, well, I took them. And he was like, wait, you took these? And I was like, yeah. And he said, do you mind if I look at them real closely? And I was like, no. And he had kind of a bit of a military feel, chopped hair, very, strong and fit. And he said, actually, I'm in forensics, and I'm dying to look at these closely. So I let him look at him. He goes, no question in my mind, that's a bullet. That's 1 in 5 million chances there, pal. You're very lucky. I was like, no kidding.
Wow,
So crazy day.
It's hard to say that this day was less crazy than that day, and yet this day was crazy.
Yes.
What was it? I know we get into questions pretty soon, but can you describe it in one sentence? I mean, you're standing there,
It's
you're thinking
hard.
this is a normal photo opportunity with a foreign leader, and sure, it's Zelensky, and so it's an important day, obviously. But did you expect it to devolve into that?
It was the most rattled I'd ever been in the Oval Office. It really was, like almost uncomfortably shaking because you're watching a full-blown argument between world leaders, and we're typically never in the room for those sort of things. But it started out as a very cordial, and then the vice president was sitting on the right, Secretary Rubio was there also, and it became very heated, and next thing you know, it was a shouting match. And really uncomfortable moment, but a very historical moment, because Zelensky's there begging for help to end the war, to help him beat the Russians, and I think the president and his team were tired of giving money to the Ukrainians. So it was quite a bit of a heated moment.
So tell us about the story that this photograph tells.
This is one, and sometimes it happens on accident during campaigns where the president will walk behind a flag or do something, that you have a silhouette, something different. And that's what us photographers are always looking for, a different moment or a different lighting situation. And the Trump administration embraced this lighting. They had a standard, sometimes at some of his big speeches, they would make him he would walk up behind this, staring. I've been on both sides of the flag and watched him walk up to it on the other side. It's nowhere near as dramatic, but when you see the silhouette on the other side, it's pretty dramatic. And they love this image. They 2 or 3 times a month we would be able to get this image. And each time you're trying to do something different, you know, and you could always tell the photographers who were seeing it for the first time because they went for what we were doing the first time. And this one I was just trying to get a little more overall view of it and just try and make something different.
Well, I guess after this we can go to questions, but I just wanted to ask you, in light of what you just said, in light of the conversation about being angry, understandably, where the White House and other entities try to replace journalism with their own images. AI is a whole other conversation
Correct.
for another day. And you've expressed, and everyone, I think people know, that in spite of some photos that may not even be that flattering, that Trump is very, very fond of the photographs, and you trust is such a huge part of your job. So taking that whole enchilada, how do you do that and still not become part of an administration's image-making machine yourself?
Yes, that is a really good question, Jennifer, because we are there, you know, we have to, you know, and that's something that our editors discuss quite a bit too. It's just like, are we playing into the imagery? Are we playing into the theater? But it is happening. It is politics now. It's everything, I think, in politics now, first foremost, is about imagery. You pick up your phone and you're looking through it and it's all about images. And those images are what we are capturing. Sometimes you do feel like you're in the theater and playing a part as the photographer for the event. And sometimes, you know, you're making organic moments, and that's all you can hope for, is just to try and make something a little different. But yeah, that thought definitely crosses your mind but that's what politics is all about. I mean, Ronald Reagan was doing it back in the day. These guys have mastered it. President Obama did too. He was a master at it. And, you know, again, the most photogenic president ever. And it was, you know, it's just something it's hard to avoid because that's the access we have. If we don't have this kind of imagery, then we can't really tell what the story was, and we can't show you, because every time I go into the Oval Office or anytime I go to an event, I feel like I'm working for, you know, the people who look at the New York Times. And I want them to be able to see what they can't see because they're not in the Oval Office with me. And I want to try and show them as much as I can. And it takes, you know, a lot of work, a lot of planning, and it also takes a staff that's willing to work with the media. Not all of them are, but when you can build the relationships, it makes all the difference in the world.
Great. Well, I want everyone to have a chance to ask you their own great questions.
Great.
We have some mics traveling around the room. Raise your hand. Students obviously will be given first priority. Let's go ahead.
Hi, my name's Krem. I'm a master's student in the Public Policy School. What do you want your legacy to be in terms of even starting out your career, your portfolio, how it's changed? And how do you think what your legacy will be has changed throughout your work?
Really good question. Legacy. I think I just want to, you know, I want to be remembered as somebody who loved covering politics, tried to capture the moments, tried to stay in the middle and stay out. You know, that's one thing that I feel like I've been able to do, is stay apolitical. And anybody who wants to get into this business, you have to be in the middle. You cannot be an activist on either side. And a lot of young journalists now who are applying for journalism jobs run into that because they have a social media feed that is slanted left or right. And anybody who comes to work at the New York Times, especially our fellows and interns, their social media is scrubbed. I mean, you're looking for anything. And there have been candidates who are great photographers, but what they say on social media is very damning to, you know, if you were going to hire them. So I think my legacy is really just trying to stay in the middle and to give back. Now I'm 66 years old. I have no plans for retiring. And I want to keep, you know, going. I'm not going to work until I'm 75 or 80, but I know I have at least one more campaign in me, maybe a couple more Olympics. But I really want to give back, you know, doing things like this, talking to students and trying to help people guide their way through this really, unfortunately, shrinking business in photojournalism. And my hope is that it will turn around once other news media companies figure out, how to do it like the New York Times has. I mean, the New York Times says, and I'm not, very lucky to work there, and I love bragging about how successful they are because they figured it out, unlike other newspapers as far as, still making money and the advertising. And so I think, I'm grateful to be where I am, and I hope to do a book, and I really want to be known for giving back too, and also just being there and being kind to all the staff and being respected, because if you have the staff's trust, then you can do whatever you want.
Over here, I think.
Hi there, my name's Clayton. I'm a graduate student at Divinity School. Great talk, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
I was just wondering if there was like an image that got away, maybe due to a camera malfunction, bad weather, etc. Thank you.
Great question.
Image that got away. Yes, there are images that I've, not by my doing, but during the campaign, there was a moment where I was traveling with President Trump recently, or when he was running for re-election, and he was eating McDonald's, and I had my camera like right here, and he was eating, and you know how every president is very, that's one thing they hate, having their picture taken, is eating. But this was just one that it was just like, I could see the image in my head, but I couldn't, by the time I lifted up my camera, and the president's sitting there with this double quarter pounder, and I'm like, all right, I'm almost there, and I pick it up like this, and he goes, Doug, put the camera down. I was like, oh, sir, please, this is amazing. He goes, not gonna happen, Doug, put it down. Nice try. I was like, oh, sir. He goes, don't do it. So that's one of those things. I could have picked up the camera and shot really quick, and then that would have been it. Then my trust is gone, my access is gone. I was invited into this bubble. It wasn't a news event. He was having a private moment. But I thought as soon as I picked up the camera, maybe he'll allow it. But I was really wrong.
And that's a good point, too, about how it's easier for you to manage that than I think a reporter. Because if he says something and you know it in your brain and you can't write it down or tell people, it's sitting with you. But that's just a missed image. It's not quite the same holdback, right? So you can ride that line more. Next question.
Hi, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Sure.
So your photos focus centrally on such important politicians and people, and I'm wondering how you think about framing the background of those photos. Is that important to the story you're trying to tell, and how do you go about thinking about that when you're focusing on the people in the center?
Really good question, because I was talking to some students yesterday about one of my earlier professors who worked for the National Geographic taught me and kept instilling in me, Doug, you look through the viewfinder, that is an open canvas. You fill that canvas however you want to. You have control to be able to move to the left, move to the right, do a different, use a different lens. But he had this term, he said, brain the frame. Use your brain to look all around that frame when you're taking a portrait of somebody or taking a presidential photograph. And that is something still comes into my mind every time I go into the Oval Office, because I want to make sure that when I'm filling that canvas, I'm filling it with everything that I feel like is important. And sometimes the symmetry's off, and then you can move and then make it right. In DC, it's a game of inches. You can be 2 inches from the photographer next to you, and a moment will happen, and they look completely different from the other photographers, because maybe somebody's in the background doing something or yawning in the background, something like that. So I am somebody who has been doing it long enough to really go into the Oval Office and I've been given the freedom by the New York Times to basically be myself. Do whatever you want. Just come back with the pictures. And having that freedom allows me to be creative and think about the backgrounds, think about the foregrounds, and make it an interesting picture. It's a little more difficult in the vertical mode now, because everybody looks, the New York Times, I think now is like 75 to 80% of our subscribers look at their content on their phone, not on a desktop anymore. It used to be desktop. First it was print, then it went to desktop, and now it's basically the phone. So looking at things vertically in that same mindset is more difficult. So it's the older I get, the more challenges keep coming my way. Hope does that hit it?
I think we have time for another one, two, maybe one or two, we'll see.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Nicole. Thank you so much for speaking to us. I'm
Absolutely.
an undergraduate in the college. You referred to artistic terms like canvas and expressing yourself. How do you balance the artistic side of photography with recording the truth? And I know you spoke about doing prior research and framing, but I'm wondering how you toe that line, especially even editing photographs, for example, between making it a piece of art and also simultaneously recording the whole truth.
Good question, Nicole, because I think the art factor comes in really once you're in a news event and you know it's going to be a news event and you are covering something that is, what we call a page one, or it's going to be a big story. And it's like you try and get the bread and butter first. You try and get the scene first. And then, given the freedom that I'm given, I can go and try a different angle. I can try remote cameras. I use remotes a lot because that's something I did in sports where, when I talk about remote camera, I can put a remote camera over on the corner and get permission from the staff first, and then the Secret Service to make sure it's not impeding the president's, in and out, egress. So those kind of pictures make for really arty pictures. And anytime I sit up here and I'm being, blessed by all this light coming in here, and I think about the light every time I go in the Oval Office too. Each president likes light differently. President Trump likes no light. President Obama loved light. Bush loved light. Reagan loved light. So it's one of those things when you are around someone enough and you see them enough, you find their mannerisms, but you also see how light affects them in different situations. So I'm always looking around and trying to find something that's different, knowing that I still have to make a news picture. So it's a fun challenge. I mean, I have to do it every day because I go in the same oval room quite often, 2 or 3 times a week, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, and you're always trying to do something different.
I think we might have time for one more if it's pretty quick question and answer.
I'm never quick with
You'll do your best.
Hi, I'm Dahlia. I'm a 4th year here in the college and a 1st year at the public policy school. I was just wondering, you mentioned before you worked for the New York Times, you worked for AP. That means that a lot of different news sources can use your photos. How much input do you have on the accompanying story or context that comes with an image? And when you worked for AP, how did you deal with, maybe completely opposing stories being accompanied by your same photograph? And did you ever feel like they were misrepresenting, what you saw happen, even though you said, photos don't lie?
Right. Yes, good point, because there are times when images that happen today are used for a story 3 days, 4 days down the road, and you're like, wow, that really didn't happen during that moment. Or that was not the picture that I would have used for that. I don't have a lot of say in that. I do have incredible photo editors at the New York Times who will contact me. Sometimes, if it's a breaking news story, they may just pull a file photo right away and put it up. I have the relationship to call an editor and say, hey, is there any chance we can use a different picture? And they will switch it out. But on a normal day, I'm pretty much the one who is, a typical Oval Office event. I may take 100, 200, 300 pictures, depending on how long we're in there. Sometimes it's 10 pictures, depending on what president is. We are in and out really quick. But I, try and do my best to just to have that storytelling photo for it. And when they aren't the ones that you want, it's something that can be talked about with the editors. But, typically, that doesn't happen a lot anymore. When I was with AP, yes, it would happen a lot. You could photograph the president making a funny face, and all of a sudden that ends up on another platform. The New York Times, probably you guys don't know, is not just a newspaper, it's a huge multimedia company, but it also supplies, just like AP, hundreds, thousands of photographs a day to newspapers all over the country. So if you're in Texas or California, you can pick up the local newspaper there and see a Doug Mills New York Times photo, because the New York Times news service a lot of these newspapers subscribe to that as a supplement to their AP coverage. I don't know if that helps.
Well, that has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much, Doug. It was such a treat to be with you.
Thank you for
everybody,
coming.
Thank you so much for coming out. If you enjoy one of our delicious lunches today, please throw your trash on your way out so we don't have to do it for you, and check our website for more events. And thank you all for coming again, and thank you so much, Doug.
Thank you for coming.